Welcome everyone to Reimaginar lo Humano, episode 28. Today I have a huge privilege to interview someone that I really admire. I'll be speaking with Charlie Heriot-Maitland. He's a clinical psychologist. He's a researcher and Scottish author. He's the co-founder of Balanced Minds, and he's one of the most creative and innovative voices in compassion-focused therapy nowadays. And Charlie has just published a fascinating book in English. We hope we can have that book in Spanish soon enough. And this book is Controlled Explosions in Mental Health, a compassionate guide to understanding why our brains self-sabotage, self-criticize, and self-harm. This was just published in this year, 2026. So this book, which I just read in the past few days, invites us to view our self-destructive patterns not as personal flaws, but as protective strategies of a brain that is designed more for survival and not for happiness. And we'll delve into that in a moment. So Charlie, welcome to Reimaginar lo Humano. It's a real honor and pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Gonzalo. It's such a pleasure to be here as well. And thank you for taking the time to read the book. I think you might be the first person in the world. It's so new. So it's great that I've got one reader so far.
I'm sure there will be many, and many people will benefit: therapists, patients, and general population. So we have a little tradition here in Reimaginar lo Humano, which is just to take 1 or 2 minutes to settle our minds for a moment, and open our bodies and mind to listen and to learn together. So I will invite you all to take a comfortable seated position. Maybe you would like to straighten your spine a little bit. Push the crown of your head towards the ceiling just a little bit so you feel the extension of your spine. Relax your shoulders. Relax your eyes. Release any tension in your jaws. And let's take together 3 deep breaths, inhaling deeply through the nose. And exhaling completely through the mouth or through the nose. And repeat this a few more times at your own pace. In each out-breath, allow yourself to release whatever happened before this meeting and whatever is going to happen afterwards. And just simply rest here together, finding a moment of peace in our busy lives, in this crazy world. And if it's available for you, we can practice bringing a gentle smile to our lips. Simply recognizing the gift that is to get together, to explore our minds, our hearts, and to find ways to relieve our suffering and other people's suffering too. How beautiful is that to get together across the world to cultivate well being and peace inside and for others. And lastly, connect with your intention to be here today. What brought you to listen to Charlie, to learn about the control explosions in our mind? Maybe it's a motivation to keep healing yourself, to find new tools for your life, maybe to help a loved one or your clients. Whatever brought you here, notice the beauty and value of your compassionate motivation. And just take one more deep breath, feeling your feet grounded, feeling your chest and belly relax and open, and feeling your mind soft and available to learn together for the next hour. And at your own pace, you can open your eyes and connect with the group. So thank you for practicing with us, and welcome to the 100 people that already are in the call. Thank you for being here. We're with Charlie Heriot-Maitland talking about his last book, Control Explosions in Mental Health. So Charlie, let's start a little bit with some background. And so I know you a little bit by now. We've spent some time together in person and online. And so I know that you've been working in mental health for over 20 years in the national health system in the UK. You've been doing research in King's College, in Glasgow, at Stanford. Now you lead Balanced Minds. But before all that, before all this huge career in psychology, you were a young man reading Carl Jung, uh,
Yeah.
and having existential questions and having to deal with your own brain and mind and maybe the mind of your loved ones. So I'm curious about this deeper thread that runs through your life and your curiosity. Maybe if you can share with us some personal experiences or encounters that you had that made you feel that you wanted to understand the function of suffering instead of just treating the symptoms. So, what led you to this path of
Yeah.
psychology, clinical work, but also spirituality, maybe?
Yes, there definitely is a a a deep motive that comes from experiences long before I trained as a psychologist. I think the one that always really sits with me and is present with me in my work as much as possible is when I was 18 and just left school. Um, my best friend and flatmate, my housemate, became psychotic um, and started having some very unusual beliefs, experiences, difficult perceptual experiences, and I was his best friend. So I became enveloped in his story. Um, I was a disciple. This was a Messiah type story. And so I just remember feeling very confused. I'd never studied psychology or anything. It was very confusing for an 18-year-old. Like, um, and quite a lot. It was interesting. Some of our friends in our group became quite dismissive. They were like, "Oh, stop talking, you idiot! You're talking rubbish. Don't be stupid." And there were other people who were very convinced by his very compelling story and very passionate story, and they almost got sucked into the narrative. And I just remember, I don't want to do either. I want to. I wanted to listen, and I didn't want to agree or disagree. I wanted to kind of listen because I was confused, really. So this was something that was very personally relevant to me. Um, and he did have to get sectioned and hospitalized, and I feel incredibly bad. I feel a lot of shame about it because I was involved with this process. But I don't know what other option there was at the time. And but I remember seeing that the treatment offered um, was just to have incredibly high doses of medication, and that was it. So just seeing this person suddenly become this shadow, um, this best friend, like, and I just remember thinking, there's got to be something better. There's got to be something better. I can't accept that this incredibly powerful experience, the best option we have is just to whack a load of medication and then that's it for years. So it was a very personally meaningful experience. And yeah, it was. I was also reading uh, Carl Jung when I was 19 as well, and also I was registered for a psychology degree, so I obviously had some interest in the brain, but I never knew about clinical psychology. I did study before I trained in clinical psychology. I studied a master's degree in psychology of religion. Um, this was this must have been after my university psychology undergraduate, but before any professional training. So I did a 2-year master's, and this was all learning about mystical experiences, and this was very Jung heavy with how Jung understands us all as having a religious archetype in our minds and mystical experiences built into our consciousness. So I was academically studying this, reading a lot of Eastern, Western philosophy about religion and life. So this was long before I ever learnt about clinical models like CBT or CFT or ACT or anything. I didn't have any understanding of that. This was all before that. And I wrote my thesis on mysticism and madness. Um,
Mm.
so these were very early interests. And I think when I then started working clinically with people and training to be a clinical psychologist, all of these interests started coming together as a real passion for helping people with psychosis. That was my main interest clinically from day one, and as a researcher as well.
Mm. That's beautiful, and surely the experience with your friend and somebody that you love that was dealing with this psychotic outbreak also brought your compassionate motivation, you have the caring motivation towards your friend, and want to find ways to offer something different than just um, labels and medication and prejudice. No?
Mm,
Um, so even if it's not the main topic of this interview, uh, I like to ask you a little bit about your work with psychosis and with
mm,
people hearing voices,
mm,
because I find it so useful that you are presenting and relating to population that, like voice hearers and psychotics, not as a separate group,
mm,
but as a part of a continuum in which we are all part. And so
mm,
maybe even people with spiritual experiences or mystical experiences, maybe normal people,
mhm,
uh, and people with psychiatric disorders are living more or less in a continuum. Can you refer to that idea and how you view psychosis
mm,
and voices?
mm. Yeah. Um, when we see psychosis as an anomaly or a broken brain or a faulty brain, we create stigma and division and shame for people. And there is a major cost to people who are stuck in cycles of stigma and shame, like feeling different, feeling that their brain is faulty. Um, and these patterns can really exacerbate dissociative processes, social rank processes. Later on in my career, these are exactly the things that I researched as being mechanisms in psychosis. So it's interesting that, you know, I think that addressing, like seeing psychosis as a continuum is is something that can break down stigma and and shame, and in turn help support the mechanisms that will move someone towards recovery. Um, but but that's just, why it's helpful clinically. But I my belief goes deeper than that. I've never believed that my brain is any different to somebody else who is hearing voices. I've never seen myself as different. I've always believed that under the right circumstances, this could be me. This could be my brain that's hearing the voices or seeing visions or sensing the presence of something. So I've never seen, and I know a lot of professionals do. A lot of professionals see their brain as actually qualitatively different, but I never have. So the continuum of psychosis is not just something that the way I understand brains, that we're all on a continuum of distress and mental well-being, but also just it's so important in terms of our treatment that we bring everyone onto this common humanity, um, because it's de-shaming and destigmatizing, and shame and stigma are are now being identified more and more as mechanisms that maintain psychosis, that maintain dissociation. So there's lots of levels to this question you asked, Gonzalo, and it's been a really important part of my research, and how I've shared these ideas with the public. And actually, it's one of the big motivators as to why I wanted to write this book, which is about people in the normal population, the general population, noticing some of their own patterns and their own self-destructive patterns that occur in daily life, because again, that helps with our common humanity.
Totally. And I think the theme of common humanity and this shaming and bringing a compassionate view of mental suffering come across throughout the whole book, but your previous book too, and all your work, and more broadly too, Charlie, in this treatment model, which is compassion focused therapy. No, it's a deeply de-shaming focus. No,
Yeah.
and as many people watching this interview or later the recording, many of them are psychotherapists themselves,
Mm.
and I always reflect on the impact that has in a client that the therapist see themselves as the same as common humanity, as
Mm.
when the therapist treats a client from a position of common vulnerability, of having to deal with tricky brains, to having to deal with our threat systems, and that we're in the same boat.
Mm.
And I don't think that is talked often enough in
No.
psychotherapies, the
Yeah.
position that one takes if it's
Yeah.
in a position of authority and health, treating
Mm.
with a this disordered brain, or from
Mm.
a position of common humanity, and we're doing what we can with what we have, and we're together in this.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. And I think it's particularly more noticeable how that doesn't happen with psychosis in particular, um, because the culture that in the UK, I don't know what it's like in Chile, but the culture in the UK is that the service culture is you don't have insight into your own problems, and you need to come around to our way of thinking. We have a superior insight, we have a kind of professional knowledge, and you have to take these pills until you agree with us. That's the culture, and you can see immediately the power dynamic between the all-knowing professional and the subordinate, non-insightful patient, and immediately you create this power threat pattern of which is very re-traumatizing, which for a lot of clients is the problem that set off these processes in the first place, which could be linked to trauma and feeling powerless and uh, down rank. So yeah,
Mm.
those things are really important, Gonzalo, across the board in psychotherapy, but particularly we've got a big challenge in psychosis services in
Yeah,
the UK. Yeah.
definitely. It's bringing to my mind the Gabor Mate's book, The Myth of Normal. I think that's the
Mm,
name in English.
mm,
And also Foucault writing about mental institutions, schools, and jails as mechanisms of oppression of dictating what is normal, no? And to punish the difference and to indoctrinate into a
yeah.
specific culture. But maybe we don't need to go in that route in this moment to get into the book. But so let's jump a little bit directly into the book, Controlled Explosions in Mental Health. So I really love the book, Charlie, and I love the creativity, and it was great to see in the book your doodles, your own
Mm,
drawings and diagrams, and it's literally hundreds of metaphors that you use for people to identify common suffering patterns in the human's mind, and then you deal at the end of the book how to work with that with more compassion. So we'll try to look into all of this,
mm,
and let's start with the metaphor that is key to the book, which is the bomb squad, no? El escuadrón
mm,
antibombas, no? The bomb squad, and the idea of controlled explosions, no? Like the bomb squad perform controlled explosions, which is intentionally detonating a device under controlled conditions to prevent something bigger to happen. So, can you walk us through this metaphor and explain what a controlled explosion in the mind looks like, and
Mm.
what's the purpose.
Yeah, so just to say first of all that the metaphor itself actually came to my mind while watching a program on British television called Trigger Point, which is about the bomb squad who go around. It was in 2022, who go around and create these controlled explosions, and yeah, to me as a clinician, this has always been a really relevant intriguing process about how we sometimes do things that are self-defeating, self-destructive, that our brains work in a way that seem to be our own worst enemy. Um, and and some people can experience themselves as, yeah, like a failure if that happens, or they've messed up, or there's something wrong with them. So, so as a clinician, I've always been interested of asking not what's wrong with you, but what's happened to you and what is the function of these
Mm.
patterns. So, what the controlled explosions metaphor does is it can hold two things in mind simultaneously. That on the one hand, something is harmful, but at the same time, it can be helpful or functional. It can have a function, and it's quite a hard thing to hold these two conflicting truths together. Something can be harmful and helpful depending on the context. And controlled explosions, when I was watching this program,
Mm.
was the perfect way, in my mind, to hold this conflicting reality. Two things can be true at the same time. So a controlled explosion, you can be creating a targeted, controlled harm in order to protect or help prevent some other harm. So that it was the perfect way to understand these really complex patterns in our mind. Because when you try and explain this to clients or academic reviewers in papers, which has happened to me. People have said, "What are you talking about, Charlie? What do you mean it can be helpful at hearing a voice?" People have asked me those questions in research, uh, peer review. Um, so I really needed a metaphor to help make sense of this complex area of human mind and human life. So so yeah, the metaphor is just as you described it. Sometimes harms that we can bring upon ourselves, and the book divides into three types of it can be self-sabotage, it can be harms that we do to our goals and our projects.
Mm.
It might be self-criticism, which are harms that we can do psychologically to ourselves. We can attack ourselves, criticize ourselves, shame ourselves. And then the third collection is harms that we do to our body. So, and again, it might be day-to-day examples of this. One of the really important things about the book is I want us all to understand the common humanity, that we're doing small examples of maybe you know uh, skin picking or biting our fingernails. We're creating little sensations in our body to help us deal with some other uh, overwhelming emotion or something.
Mm.
So it's just that's the theme that holds the book together, that the things that we might do to ourselves that could bring some harm, but they're trying to prevent some other harm or feared harm from happening.
Great, thank you. That's a great introduction to this metaphor. And so, just two things I want to say to bring this maybe more clearly to people is that, for instance, when I self-criticize in my mind, that's painful. I create pain in myself when I'm self-critic. But in this view and in the CFT view, compassion focused therapy, but what you present is that this self-criticism is maybe helping me avoid an even more feared experience than the pain of self-criticism. For instance, to receive a
Mm.
criticism from others.
Yeah.
Is that the case? Or when
Yeah.
we
Well,
procrastinate, we're procrastination is painful because we're not accomplishing things that we want to accomplish,
yeah.
but maybe we're protecting from something else that we fear even more
Yeah.
than procrastination.
Which might be the fear of failure or humiliation or rejection. So it's always trying to understand what is the bigger harm that it's serving to protect. And with self-criticism, um, absolutely, it's this idea that, if I put myself down first, I reduce
Mm,
the risk of being taken down by someone else. So yeah, again, we might keep these harms in-house in a controlled version to prevent someone else from hurting us or rejecting us or
mm.
criticizing us. So yeah, that those are some examples, but there's a big range. There's 15 different bomb squad members in the book, which covers a broad range of how this plays out in our lives.
So that's the other thing that I want to share. And so this I find it really amazing to being able to categorize 15 ways in which we hurt ourselves to protect ourselves from something else.
Mm,
And I was telling Charlie before the meeting that just having names is really helpful to be able to see these processes happening.
mm,
And that's the
mm,
basic thing of mindfulness. No, when we name something, we can take the balcony view, no, to the broader view. We can be detached or diffused with the pattern. If
mm,
if I if I start naming the self-sabotaging squad member, no, in my life, I start seeing, maybe this is happening now. So I
yeah.
want to share with the group th- this image here, which comes from the book and which I translated into Spanish here. So you haven't seen this, Charlie, but so this is the
It's great.
the bomb squad. And as Charlie said, we have five team members of the self-sabotage team. Then we have five team members of the self-criticism team. And then we have five more characters in the physical self-harm team. No? So this would be in Spanish autosabotaje, autocrítica, y autolesión.
Mm.
So I I want to ask you, Charlie, maybe if you can take us through a few of these, maybe the most common that we find in our own suffering. For instance, myself, I suffer a lot from procrastination and
Mm,
perfectionism, and I'm
mm,
sure many of people here too. But
mm.
if you want to take us through understanding some of these, maybe the most common that you see in your practice
Yeah,
or in your own
yeah,
life, in your own mind, maybe even.
yeah. Well, I definitely noticed the procrastination when actually writing the book. So that was actually something that was very present for me because that when you're writing a book, especially when you get close to finishing, the threat level starts getting a little bit higher because you're getting close to, I don't know, like being evaluated or judged. or maybe my book will be rubbish and the critics will write, this was terrible. So that when you're getting close to finishing a task, there some other feared scenarios might start coming up in your mind. And so procrastination might be a way of avoiding these difficult feelings. So we might sabotage a project or we might kind of put goals on hold to avoid the fear that we might fail. And this beautiful idea I had for a book, maybe the reality won't be so good. It's safer to keep it as a fantasy rather than a reality. So that's just one example of how some of the, and particularly if you're someone who maybe at school or as a child got criticized quite a lot for your, work at school or you might have more sensitivity to these fears. And obviously if you've been a survivor of trauma and really kind of severe experiences of harm, then these get become amplified even more and might be quite harsh self-critics telling you to not do this or you're useless, you can't finish this book. So, so you have these sort of graded layers of more amplified versions of controlled explosions which might be linked to how vulnerable you feel and how much what memories you've had of being hurt or traumatized or being left feeling punished in the past. So one of the things that the book tries to do is sort of takes us through day-to-day examples like I kept distracting myself from the spreadsheet because it was boring. I kept checking social media as a way of procrastinating. So we've got those day-to-day examples, and then you take it all the way into uh, these slightly more amplified versions where we have quite powerful forces in our brain shutting us down or switching us off so that we don't uh, expose ourselves to this potential punishment, failure, rejection, re-traumatization. So, so yeah, those are a few examples. There's a few other interesting ones, like the chaos creator. And I don't know
Mm.
whether this applies to anyone here on the call, but sometimes sometimes I've noticed, and I see this in my clients as well clinically, is sometimes they might create a drama in their life,
Mm.
or suddenly we've got an expression in the UK like um, stir up the hornet's nest. Like we just sort of create a kind of drama, especially when things are getting a little bit difficult over here. So maybe I'm a bit stuck with a decision or I'm a bit stuck in a job, maybe. I don't know whether to stay in the job and I can't leave the job. I might create a situation that quickly moves me to a decision so that I can get out of that stuck place. So sometimes we can create drama. We can even attract like get into a fight with someone. We can draw uh, hostility from other people as a way of dealing with our own difficult emotions. So another example is one of the things I talked about in the book is this sort of classic movie scene where you see someone who's just gone through an awful breakup or bereavement or something, and they're drinking like whiskey at the bar, like one after the other. And then they go and pick a fight with someone, in the
Mm.
bar. So this is again, we would call this in the language of controlled explosions, a way of creating a harm to avoid some other emotional based harm. So there are I hope that, yeah, I hope that gives you a sense of the kind of spectrum of examples that we talk about in the book. I do talk a bit about voice hearing as well, because that's obviously my own personal interest, but I don't. There is one section later where I talk about the kit, the equipment that the bomb squad uses. And when I talk about voice hearing, I talk about remote detonators. So this is when we can, it's a bit
Mm.
like self-criticism about how we might kind of attack ourselves, except we can do it from a remote location. Our brain can create it coming from the outside, like a voice that we hear, and that might have an even bigger effect on how we elicit our protective responses. Because if we hear a voice attacking us from the outside, we might have a bigger reaction to protect ourselves. So that was just how I bring in some of the more clinical examples into this controlled explosions framework.
That's brilliant. So one function of these control explosions would be to create a smaller harm that what could happen in my imagination at least. But you also mentioned another function that I found really interesting, which was training for real threat, training our threat system to respond to what can go wrong. Can you talk a little bit about that, like how important is the threat system for human beings and how self-creating suffering can be a way uh, of facilitating survival for humans in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is yeah, it's another angle which could be going on is how we might be kind of uh, training and rehearsing threat scenarios so that if they do occur in the future, then we'd be ready. We'd be more likely to be able to respond and deal with something difficult. So our brain, we might be able to think of our brain as a bit like a kind of inner fortress, like an inner holding cell where we can do a bit of practice. It's a bit like a an airline pilot practicing simulations for flying a plane. You know, they need somewhere to practice their skills in a safe environment. So I introduced that idea that sometimes we might be able to create these internal rehearsals, um, because there's nothing worse than being totally overwhelmed by something unexpected. Like
Mm,
for a human being, the worst situation is uncertain threat, unexpected
mm,
threat. We can deal with a lot of threat in our life, and sometimes we can deal with uncertainty, but when it's uncertain threat, that's the worst. So we will do everything we can to prevent this kind of surprise threat
mm,
where we're left totally powerless. And some people who have experienced trauma in their life, they've had that experience. They've had that experience of being utterly powerless in the presence of a powerful threat. And they will do anything they can to prevent that from happening again, to prevent being re-traumatized. So they might need to just, constantly be self-critical, constantly put themselves in you know, situations where they have to dissociate because they need to keep
mm,
these trauma protection strategies online. They can't risk being utterly powerless again. So that's another example, that sort of idea of training a muscle or training our threat system to prevent future harm from overwhelming us.
mm. I think that that is huge in our mental mind, the need for certainty in a very uncertain world. and you delve into in the book into how our minds are not reading reality but are trying to predict reality, because we don't see reality as it is, but what we see, being out there, is very much shaped by our motives, our
mm,
emotions.
mm,
So, and it was a little bit painful to read and to find myself very identified with many of the squad members, no?
mm.
Particularly,
Yeah,
I was thinking about the pessimist that resonated with me, no?
yeah,
I
yeah,
try to work on my on bringing an optimistic outlook for myself and for others, but I enter easily in doom and gloom, no?
mm,
Especially seeing the state of the world.
mm,
And
yeah,
and I also recognize myself in the certainty seeker and el buscador de certeza, no? And trying to find certainty in what I perceive. Why do you think is that? What do you think, like, so many of us are looking for certainty, even though it brings a lot of deception and a lot of pain because we don't find
mm,
it, and we're building
yeah,
castles out of thin air, and we prefer to believe something that is bad instead of just being open of what could be.
yeah,
Mm?
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's our brain needs a story. It's very hard to sit with the not knowing. And if you think about it in an evolutionary perspective, uncertainty meant death at the end of the day. It's this is why I'm really drawn to compassion focused therapy because of the evolutionary background that we can make sense of a brain in its evolutionary context. Like we're constantly needing to create constructs and meaning of our environments so that we can engage with actions to survive. And it comes back to that evolutionary motive. So uncertainty gives us anxious feelings. It gives us stress, and certainty gives us, rewarding feelings and dopamine feelings. And actually, what's quite interesting, one of the things I talk about in the book is how sometimes we push ourselves to the edge of certainty to get the reward of coming back. So like we might watch a horror movie, which is terrifying, to give ourselves this sort of sensation, but we know that we can control it. We know that it's a controllable threat. We can stop the movie at any time and we can go and have a cup of tea or a beer or whatever. Um, and also extreme sports, how we kind of we can do it, we can engage with this, creating these sensations and these stress experiences, but we know that we can pull them back. We know that we can control it. We know we can stop at any time. So we quite like these kind of sensation seeking states, as long as they are still just enough within the right levels of control. As soon as you go out of control, into uncertainty, then these become awful. So a lot of I'm quite interested in this kind of this sensation seeking bits of humans. We experiment with drugs and other things, give ourselves sensations, but there's always a level of control that we try and keep over it. And we get a lot of reward from that, mastering that uncertainty.
Thank you. And speaking of sensations, when one person that signed up for this talk shared his story about biting his nails for the past 30 years or so, or even more. So he was asking, is there a way that we can change such an ingrained habit, you know?
Mm.
And how could I understand this from a compassionate lens, no? And this would be in the self-harm category of the squad, no? And
Yeah,
maybe if we widen it up a little bit, like teenagers that cut themselves, for instance,
yeah.
or even body modifications. What can you say about those those control explosions that manifest as
Mm.
self-harm?
Well, starting with biting your fingernails, I guess there could be two different things going on. Like one, but I mean, you're right that after 30 years, like the habit takes over. Like you might lose that initial function, like harm created and harm averted. But when we're starting in a habit, you know, there might be a kind of avoidance function or a distraction function. So we're creating sensations, same as if we're pulling our hair or biting our nails. We are creating mini sensations which might distract us from an uncomfortable feeling that we're having. And I know that my son, 14-year-old son, bites his fingernails when he's anxious. So you know the anxiety, the anxious feeling, and the fingernail helps him be grounded and distracted from the anxious feeling. Or if some of these physical sensations actually create pain, create harm, that might be a slightly different function. It might be more to do with the pain relief experience that you get. So if you pull your hair quite strong, quite hard, it hurts to begin with, but then when you let go, it actually feels quite nice. There's like a pain first, and then a pain relief second, and that's your body releasing chemicals like endorphins, your pain relief chemicals. So for some people, the they might get addicted to the pain relief sensation, so it could be distraction to avoid something, but it could be actually to create sensations in your body that feel soothing and feel calming, because that will help you with your emotional distress as well. If you're suddenly flooded with endorphins, which because you've like banged your fist on the wall um, or pulled your hair or maybe you've cut your wrist. These natural pain relief chemicals might be the thing that you become addicted to, and that forms a habit because it works. It's like it has a powerful effect in regulating your emotion. I mean, it's not healthy, it's harmful, but it is something that you learn and your habits become formed because they work.
Hmm. Hmm. So we're stepping now into bringing this compassionate view to these patterns. These
Mm,
patterns bring a lot of shame. I'm thinking about harming yourself or feeling guilty all the time or blaming others, blaming yourself, food addiction, porn addiction, and so on. We're starting to see all these suffering patterns as ways of dealing with the threat system. Like we're provoking stress and at the same time relieving ourselves from even more stress
mm,
of facing what we're avoiding. So that it's a tricky move of the mind. So when we start seeing these bomb squad members creating these explosions, we might be tempted to bomb the squad, to destroy them, to try to get rid of them, but
mm,
they won't go. So, so what do you propose in your view that we do? How
mm.
can For instance, if I realize that I procrastinate a lot of this person that is biting his nails and say, okay, I wanna change this, what would be the steps of working with these self-harming habits?
Um, oh, one of the things I was really uh, careful of in the book was not to give advice about what you should and shouldn't do. It's not,
Mm.
there's there's so many self-help books and billions in the world, saying you should do this, you should do that. And I didn't want to be another one of them. So what the approach that I took in the book is to map out what is going on here, to bring insight and understanding into the harm created and the harm averted. So these two parts, for each of these examples, whether it's nail biting or perfectionism or self-harming, your body, um, we would always map out what is the harm being created and what is the harm that I'm avoiding. And then once you've got these two things, these coexisting things together, that's when you can start having choices. You know, so I'm not going to tell you what is the right choice for you because it might be that actually it's important for you to keep self-harming because you're not ready to deal with your trauma yet. And so I don't know that as the author of the book. So it's all about giving the reader the tools to make their own choices. Do I want to keep harming myself by restricting food or pulling my hair or whatever? Or do I want to address the underlying fear, the underlying hurt or vulnerability? And that's where compassion comes in because once we identify the harm averted, the underlying fear that's been avoided or protected, what we've done is we've identified what needs compassion. So if we
Mm.
do want to address it, we need to bring compassion to the thing that's driving it. So we're not going to sort of, if I've got a child who's biting their fingernails, I'm not going to say, stop biting your fingernails. That's a filthy habit. Using that kind of bringing another bomb squad to bomb the other bomb squad. I might ask them, what is, what are you anxious about? So you go straight for the thing that's underneath the emotional fear or
Mm.
vulnerability or hurt or unmet need. That's what needs compassion. Because if you can meet that hurt part with compassion, it might be that over time the controlled explosion becomes less necessary. So you're not trying to force a quick fix. You're not trying to bomb the bomb squad, criticize it or fight it or get into a conflict with it. You're trying to identify the driver, what's underneath. And that's what needs compassion. And once you can bring compassion there, then the system can start to settle, and you can start making choices.
That's beautiful. So what I understand is that the compassionate take would be to understand that it's reasonable to have the fear that the person is wanted to avert. No? That it makes
It's
sense to be
that's
afraid
understandable.
of
Yeah.
being criticized by others or whatever. It's the underlying fear that is driving the control explosion. No,
Yeah.
but slowly start building alternative ways of dealing with that fear that do not have unintended consequences. Like, how can I deal with my fear of of others being critics of myself without using the strategy of self-criticizing myself to the point of suffering from that? Is that the case?
I want to be a little bit careful about the idea of alternative strategies because actually I think sometimes it's the engagement, the compassionate engagement with the fear. It's the more the embodied experience of sitting there with that vulnerability and being with it and taking care of that hurt part. Sometimes that is the transformative experience for people. And the problem if you start talking about what's about a strategy or a different
Mm.
you might lose that really important compassionate engagement, which takes courage and it's about slowing down. It's not really a cognitive process for and in the book we actually have a couple of guided imagery practices that help people find a way of sitting down with the hurt child self or whatever it is that's trying desperately to there are protective processes that are trying to protect that vulnerable child. So
Mm.
so yeah, I'm a little bit cautious about the idea of finding new strategies.
Yes.
But
Mm.
I see what you mean.
And I totally see your point too, because we can come up with alternative strategies without sitting with a compassionate stance of looking at this survival strategy that has served a purpose and it made sense in the context of my life because of what happened to me before. So I love that you mentioned that at the beginning of the of our talk that when you see somebody suffering from these protective strategies, you would ask what happened to you, not what's wrong with you, because everything that we learn to do to deal with our suffering makes sense in the context of this of my story
Yeah. Yes.
and
Yeah.
my relational stories especially, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. That's absolutely. And when that part can be validated and heard and understood and maybe met with a compassionate presence and an intention,
Mm,
that process itself starts healing the need for protective processes because you're building safeness into the body and the nervous system, and these kind of protective patterns, yeah, they make perfect sense.
mm, mhm. There's so much to talk about with your book. It's huge. I mean, it's huge in not it's because it's too long, but it's huge in terms of provocative ideas and useful things. And ¿cómo va la gente en la sala? ¿Cómo están? How's everybody's doing? Are are you following what's been said? You can maybe comment in the chat. How are you doing with this talk? And maybe Charlie, only if you feel like doing this, would you lead us in a brief practice, maybe a compassionate self practice or something related to what we've been talking about? Um, Something that could help us maybe bring a little bit of compassion to our own bomb squad.
Uh, okay, well that's that might be a a little bit tricky to apply it to a bomb squad, but I'd be happy
Yeah,
to
maybe
just
something
lead
more
a
general. Hmm?
more of a self-compassion
Yeah,
practice, maybe. Yeah, that would, yeah, I'm happy to
that'd
do
be
that.
awesome.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Okay. So so are we ready to go for that now? Yeah? Okay. Um, okay. So thanks for listening, everyone. We can now just give ourselves permission, just to bring our awareness into the present moment. I know that there's been a lot of and ideas, maybe new information. There might be a lot of thoughts and plans of things you want to do with your clients, maybe. So just becoming aware of that experience of being you in this moment. And and if we can just bring our body posture a little bit more grounded and stable so that we can really become a bit more centered and grounded in this moment with our feet and our shoulders rolling back a little bit, just creating a bit more expansiveness and volume in your lungs. And just allowing the rhythm of your breathing to settle into a smooth, even flow. And maybe just in this moment, just becoming aware if there's anything that's been activated in your body from this talk. There might be something that resonated, that applies to your life, that when we were talking might have made you think of yourself or one of your clients or loved ones. Just noticing that in your body, whether there is any tension or tightness or an emotion that's shown up for you. And while you're doing that, just keeping that steady, smooth breathing rhythm and that grounded body posture. And if it feels okay, you once you've identified a place or a location where you're noticing something in your body, you might like to just put a hand there, just to acknowledge it's it's shown up. But you don't have to if you don't want to. You could just notice it in your mind's eye. Just notice where that is in your body. Okay, so I'll just leave that with you, whether you want to put a hand there or just to be present with that body experience. And sending your compassion to that place. I've noticed that you're there, and I know that it's understandable and I'm here to help. Okay, so I've noticed that you're there. It's understandable. And I'm here to help. And just for a few more breaths, just keep that compassion flowing to that place in your body, that part of you. Okay, so you can just relax your hand, take your hand away if you like. Maybe just reorientate a little bit to your where you are in the room, and when you're ready, you can come back, finish up the practice.
Thank you, Charlie, for guiding this beautiful practice. And so one obvious way to keep working uh, in our own explosions is to develop a practice, no? To have a little bit of daily practice. Maybe people here know that they have audios available in Spanish in my webpage, but hopefully we'll have your audios too from this book and sometime soon available. And maybe a last quick question is for somebody that is listening to you today, that is recognizing their own control explosions and feel trapped, what would be the first small step they could take today or tonight to start working in deactivating these bombs? What would you say to someone that is just beginning their
Mm.
path of self-healing?
You know, I would always start with the posture and the breathing, because in that practice we just did there, we have this idea that's said a lot in CFT, which is using your body to support your mind, using your body to support your mind. So if you can create that sort of posture and breathing rhythm, then this opens up a whole shift in your state of mind where you're able to be more curious and lean in from a place of calm, wisdom, and groundedness. The thing is, when we are in our threat system, it's very hard to relate to these parts that are harmful. So I'd always recommend the first step is adjust the posture and the breath and just give it a bit of time and then lean in and just be curious. I wonder what this is going on. Uh,
Yeah.
just asking yourself that question from a place of groundedness. Um, and yeah, I think so many people try and deal with things quickly, but that, I really think the message is to slow down and use your body to support your mind, to support that curious, compassionate intention towards yourself.
That's such a great point of view. And of course, Paul Gilbert is here with us, isn't he? No? Our common mentor, reminding ourselves, slow down, and how we cannot shift from threat to caring from a body that is in fight, flight, or freeze. No, that we need to go from the ground up. And that is such a good reminder, especially for people that work in mental health, because we tend to be so heady and we try to shift or change thoughts without changing the physiology. And it just doesn't work. And it's slow. It takes time, it takes practice. So thank you for that beautiful reminder, Charlie. So this conversation has been a gift for me, and I know for many people here in the room, and for many people that will listen to this afterwards. And I would summarize a little bit saying that to deactivate bombs, we need to understand compassionately why the bomb was there in the first place. What's the function that it's serving? So thank you so much for your time, Charlie. Thank you so much for writing this amazing book. I hope we have it in Spanish soon. If I can help making it happen in some way, count on me for that. Yeah. And thank you for everyone that has been interested. Like it's amazing to have 100 people listening to a talk in English. Most people here are Spanish speakers. So thank you all for your patience. Thank you so much, Manu, for your simultaneous translation in the Spanish channel. Let us know if the subtitles work, if they work, because it's the first time that we're using subtitles too, if that was of help. Anyway, thank you so much, Charlie. I don't know if you wanna leave any message at the end before we close.
I just wanted to add another thank you, everyone. I've really appreciated taking your time out to listen, and I hope there's things that you can take away for yourself and your loved ones. But it's been a real pleasure. Thank you, Gonzalo, as well.
Fantastic. All right, thank you, everyone. I'm going to close the recording now. If you want, you can unmute yourself to say bye for a moment. That's totally okay. If you want to say something to Charlie or to me or to the group, you're all welcome to open your mics and say goodbye.
Thank you, Gonzalo. Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you, Charlie. Gracias, Gonzalo.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, both of you. It was beautiful.
Gracias.
Muchas
Muchas gracias,
gracias.
Thank you.
Gonzalo. Muchas gracias a todos.
Gracias, Gonzalo.
Thank you
Chao.
very much.
Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias a todos.
Gracias. Un gran abrazo a los dos. A todos.
Abrazos, abrazos. Gracias a todos. Thank you for your fantastic work, Charlie. Keep on and let's stay in touch. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.